What we're talking about here is the fine-tuning of the universe just to exist. We haven't even gotten to the point life exists in a universe that's so finely tuned for life itself. But leave life out of it for right now. Just the whole idea, if the universe expands just right, but not too much, it would burn out. The gravity keeps it from expanding too much, but not too much contraction, because it would all go back into a black hole. It all has to be just right. Some people call this the Anthropic principle, the principle of life. Some people call this the Goldilocks conclusion, because everything has to be just right. Hey, welcome to Church for Skeptics. Dan Arsenal here. This will be the third now in a series regarding the evidence for God. I think it's overwhelming, and I think especially in the last, let's say, 50 years, we're adding another 50, making it the last 100 years. The evidence has gotten multiplied over and over and over again to the point truly that it's overwhelming. I'm using a book here that I would recommend to you by Eric Metaxas called Atheism Dead. And of course, you know, this is Eric Metaxas, so he's gonna reach for the stars as far as his arguments go, but they're good arguments. We ended last week, we're talking about the beginning of the universe. The universe had a beginning. Well, that's in the last 100 years. Science has confirmed that. And again, that's exactly what the scriptures have said since the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There wasn't a universe. Now there is a universe. You have to explain that. And the best explanation for that is creation. Ex nihilo is what the theologians have said for centuries here. And so that's when we ended last week with a quote by Robert Jastrow, who's not a believer. He's an agnostic, an astronomer, wrote a book called God and the Astronomers. But here's what he says, and I think it's a perfect way to start this. And we're just bumping the number one thing. What we're getting to today is the fine-tuning of the universe, which is kind of point number two, and especially in the last 50 years, this has become an astronomical, no pun intended, science, the idea of the anthropic principle. How did we get here? All right, so here's what Jastrow says. He says, the discovery of a definite cosmic beginning is an exceedingly strange development. Now, he's talking about the Big Bang. He's talking about the idea that there's a beginning for the universe. It hasn't been here forever and ever and ever. And then he says, unexpected by all but the theologians. In other words, science did not see that coming. Theologians did, because they trusted Scripture. There were other good reasons, too. We talked about that last time, so I won't rehash that. And then he says, they've always accepted the Bible. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. It is unexpected, science, because science has such extraordinary success, has had such extraordinary success in trying the chain of cause and effect backward in time. For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountain of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak, and as he pulls himself up over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries saying, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The next thing that we're talking about here, that's a big deal. It just is. The whole Big Bang Theory and the idea that the universe had a beginning is a big deal. And everybody knows, everybody knew at the time, and they still know that smacks of religion. That's what the reason many scientists didn't like it at first, and maybe they still don't for all I know. The logic also points not just to an eternal first cause. Logic itself has pointed for centuries, and always has actually, to an eternal first cause. If there is a first cause for the universe, then that first cause must be eternal, hence uncaused. Otherwise it wouldn't be first. That's just reason. Also, the universe that we do have is so virtually infinitely complex that it must have required a designer. That's where we are here now. And the second point of this is, and in the last 50 years, the parameters requiring fine-tuning of the universe for its existence. Not just for life, we'll get to that, but the universe itself existing is remarkable in itself. It shouldn't be here. It just shouldn't be here because there are too many things that have to be just right, and you've only got three options for that. Years ago, Richard Dawkins was in a debate, and by the way, you don't have, not just the debate, his book, The God Delusion, I've read that a couple times. This is a flagrant self-contradiction. Here, on the one hand, he says there is absolutely no evidence for the existence of God. On the other hand, he says that science is in the business of explaining why the appearance of design is not actually design at all, but comes about by, of course, by chance. And he uses that word over and over and over again. We're just lucky, just by chance, this happened and that happened. Well, you can't have it both ways. Either there is not evidence for the existence of God, or the universe appears, that's evidence. Appearance is evidence. Appears to be designed by a designer. Science has made the career of trying to discredit that common sense idea, but not in the last 50 years, because the evidence just keeps piling up to the contrary, that there must be a designer. I'm going to show you this. I'm going to read you something, and then I'm going to make a list here, and then we're going to only talk about one or two things in this list here. How has the universe come about? It came about, of course, we call it with the Big Bang, but that Big Bang had to be so perfectly calibrated that if it was too much of an explosion, let's say, we'll call it that, then everything would have burned up. If there was too little of an explosion, then gravity would have sucked it back into a black hole, and we wouldn't be either way. Everything had to be just perfectly fine-tuned, and we'll talk about what it means to have the fine-tuning argument. I want to say this, I don't know that this is true, but you could ask yourself this, and you can certainly comment to me about it. I wonder how many people actually know and understand the scientific ramifications of the fine-tuning of the universe, and the fine-tuning of the universe so that we can have life here on planet Earth. There are so many parameters that have to be just so. I'm going to read you a little paragraph here. Cosmology has unearthed extraordinarily, now watch this, low tolerance. In other words, it shouldn't have happened. Extraordinarily low tolerance for the fundamental physical constants. The physical constants are simply the natural laws. Law of gravity, law of expansion, and so on and so on and so on and so on. Laws of chemistry, laws of biology. And what he's saying is that the tolerance for those things is so little that we wouldn't exist at all unless they were just so perfectly calibrated. Together, that has to work together. The universe is wired in such a way that life in it is possible. That includes the fine-tuning of the laws of physics, the physical constants, the initial conditions of the universe, the Big Bang, the cosmological constant, which means the expansion of the universe, the subatomic particles, how electrons work and how photons work and how quarks work, atoms, the force of gravity, carbon nucleosynthesis, the basis of all life on Earth had to be perfectly calibrated. The Milky Way galaxy, which allows us to have an inhabitable zone, we call it the Earth. The solar system, the sun, the earth, the moon, water, the electromagnetic spectrum, biochemistry. What could have caused the universe to wind up this way? Think about this. Who thinks about how important water is? I mean, we know we need water, and we know we drink water. But the idea of water itself and how water works is just so remarkable, and it has to be just right, or we could not survive. We have to have water to survive, and there's some things that are so remarkable about water, it's just obvious they were designed. That's a lot of things that have to be just right for us to have life on Earth and Earth itself. Think of it like this. If I was back in the day when I'm riding in my car down in the country and I'm looking for a radio station and I'm fine-tuning that dial. You remember that? Now you just, it's digital now, and on an analog system, you're barely trying to tweak that dial just to get it just right so you can get the frequency just right so you can hear the radio station. Well, the point of the fine-tuning argument is that there are hundreds and perhaps thousands of dials that have to be perfectly calibrated for the universe to exist. They can't just come randomly. Think about this again. There are only three options when you come to the idea of the appearance of design. And again, even Richard Dawkins agrees that the universe appears to be designed in virtually every aspect. Now, he wants to say that science is in the business of showing why it's not really designed, even though it looks designed. But the evidence is that it's completely designed. And what are the three options? Well, one would be necessity. It has to be like it is. And you could make the argument, well, if it wasn't like it is, we wouldn't be here. But that's really not an argument, and it really doesn't explain anything. The second thing is chance. We just happen to get lucky. Of course, they would invoke evolution, neo-Darwinism, that it's not just about life and biology, that Darwinism and the evolution's about the way the universe came into being, and it's all by luck. It's all by chance. But once the mathematicians got involved in that, and they said, no, there's no chance for this. It's like 1 times 10 to the 10,000th power. There aren't that many atoms in the universe. Even if the universe were 13.5 billion years, there's not enough time for these things to happen by chance. And so the only option, the other option is design. It's not necessity, it's not chance, it's got to be design. And if you have design, you have a designer. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and that is by far, and I'm just saying, maybe it's just in my view, maybe you think it's differently, but I have to say that is by far the most common sense explanation for why we are here in the first place. I'm going to read you some more here from the book. British physicist Fred Hoyle, who was very much opposed at the beginning from the Big Bang. He didn't like the idea. Matter of fact, he coined the phrase in a negative way. He came to understand that there has to be an intelligence behind the universe because there's so many things that have to be just so. Anthony Flew, the great atheist for 50 years, and made his career trying to defend atheism. His last book, Why There Has to Be a God. Here's my point to you, is that every one of those guys came to know that there has to be an intelligent designer behind the universe because of the vast complexity of what we're talking about. Everything, gravity has to be just right. Did you know there's a mathematical formula for gravity? And you know what? It has an equal sign. You know what that means? It means it's logical. Why would gravity be logical? Did you know there's a mathematical formula for virtually every physical constant, and it has an equal sign on it? And it means that everything about our universe is logical. Everything about our universe can be explained mathematically. That in itself is remarkable. Well, I'm going to only give you a couple quick things here, but the list goes on and on and on about intelligent design. And my big point here is in the last 50 years, it's just gotten astronomical. Hence the book, The End of Atheism, is Atheism Dead? If it's not dead, it's surely dying. When the universe came into being, two things happened. Of course, it's not really an explosion. They said there was light throughout the whole universe in an instant. In the beginning, God said, let there be light, and there was light. But the point is, it's like an explosion. It's like a burst of energy. Two things had to happen. The universe had to expand. It came from a singularity, a nothingness, and expands to the whole universe, and then it continues to expand. But the other point is they also have gravity that keeps it from expanding too fast. I've heard the illustration, if you take a ruler and expand it through the whole universe, which is pretty big, and move the dial 1 inch, we're back to the dialing system now. If you move the force of gravity 1 inch, there would be no universe. For one of two reasons. Either if gravity was a little bit less, then it would not pull things together. Stars could not cool. The energy could not cool. You couldn't have stars, galaxies, and so forth. Planets, of course, because everything would expand so fast it would just burn up. If gravity were a little greater, then everything would just be sucked back into a black hole. It would be like a flash in the pan either way. But that's not the case. Everything is so perfectly calibrated. Now, is that by necessity? Well, who necessitated it then? If it's by chance, if you can believe that, then you got a lot of faith to believe in chance. You don't want to take those odds to Las Vegas for sure. And the only other option, design. I'm going to read you a couple of quotes here from, again, Fred Hoyle, British physicist, certainly not a Christian. Here's what Fred Hoyle said in 1959. He says, if this were purely a scientific question, and not one that touched on the religious problem, he calls it. I like that. It's a religious problem. It's a problem for a lot of people. If this just science, if religion wasn't involved in it at all, here's what he says. I do not believe that any scientist who has examined the evidence would fail to draw the inference that the laws of nuclear physics have been deliberately designed with regard to the consequences they produce inside the stars. It seemed obvious to him, and he even had the guts to say that those who did not agree with him were bothered on religious grounds, not scientific grounds. But to him it was clear, however little he liked it. He said that if one did not think a designer had done this, and here's a quote, then we are back again to a monstrous sequence of accidents. A monstrous sequence of accidents. That's Richard Dawkins. That's the God delusion. It's either design or chance. There's no, really, necessity doesn't even play into it. Here's another thing that he said 2 decades later, Fred Hoyle, the physicist. Would you not say to yourself, some super calculating intellect must have designed the properties of the carbon atom? Otherwise, the chance of my finding such an atom through the blind forces of nature would be utterly minuscule. Of course you would. A common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics. Now we're back to Antony Flew. By the way, Antony Flew, the great philosophical atheist who became a theist, used the idea of the illustration of monkeys typing on a typewriter. And the idea is on a computer. Monkeys would be the least intelligent. They would have some intelligence, I suppose, but the least intelligent, and they're banging away at random by chance on a computer, and no matter even if it took an infinite number of time for that to happen, you would never come up with a Shakespearean sonnet based on that chance operation of monkeys on a computer. And he used that very illustration. Now Fred Hoyle's talking about getting monkeyed as well. He said their super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as with chemistry and biology. And here's my big point here. Here's what Fred Hoyle says, there are no blind forces, natural laws, constant. They're not blind. They're their design. That's why we have equations. That's why they're logical. There are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The number one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. Religious people and preachers can be closed-minded. And scientists can be equally closed-minded. And people like Antony Flew have incurred the wrath, they did before they died, incurred the wrath of the atheistic community. Fred Hoyle incurred the wrath of the atheistic scientific community. All kinds of names. And he's just saying, hey, this is what the evidence points to. And here's what he says. Without being deflected by a fear of incurring the wrath of scientific opinion, one arrives at the conclusion that biomaterials, living matter, with their amazing measure of order, must be the outcome of intelligent design. No other possibility I have been able to think of in pondering this issue over quite a long time seems to me to have anything like as high a possibility of being true. So what we're talking about here is the fine-tuning of the universe just to exist. We haven't even gotten to the point. The next thing we'll talk about how life exists in a universe that's so finely tuned for life itself. But leave life out of it for right now. Just the whole idea of the universe expands just right, but not too much, it would burn out. The gravity keeps it from expanding too much, but not too much contraction because it would all go back into a black hole. It all has to be just right. Some people call this the anthropic principle, the principle of life. Some people call this the Goldilocks conclusion because everything has to be just right, like Goldilocks. It's really hard to imagine other than God creating the universe the way He did. And that's what Scripture says. Take a look, think about this. Thanks for watching.